सुनीता विलियम्स की सुरक्षित लैंडिंग पर भारत में जश्न। नमस्कार, आप देख रहे हैं हरियाणा हलचल न्यूज 24 पर बेहद खास रिपोर्ट। आज की सबसे बड़ी और गर्व भरी खबर, भारत की शान इंडियन सुपरस्टार सुनीता विलियम्स की अमेरिका में सफल और सुरक्षित लैंडिंग। वह रिकॉर्ड 9 महीनों तक अंतरिक्ष में फंसी रही है। बुधवार की सुबह 3:30 बजे सुनीता विलियम्स ने अंतरिक्ष से धरती पर सुरक्षित वापसी की। जैसे ही यह खबर आई, पूरे भारत में खुशी की लहर दौड़ गई। भारत ही नहीं, पूरी दुनिया की निगाहें इस ऐतिहासिक क्षण पर टिकी हुई थीं। इस मिशन की सफलता के लिए भारत में मंगलवार सुबह से ही प्रार्थनाओं का दौर जारी था। मंदिरों, मस्जिदों, गुरुद्वारों और चर्चों में लोगों ने सुनीता की सुरक्षित वापसी के लिए दुआएं मांगी। करोड़ों भारतीय इस ऐतिहासिक लैंडिंग का सीधा प्रसारण देखते रहे और जब उनकी वापसी सफल हुई तो मानो पूरे देश ने एक साथ बम पटाखे चलाकर अपनी खुशी का इजहार करते हुए राहत की सांस ली। सुनीता विलियम्स न केवल भारतीय मूल की अंतरिक्ष यात्री हैं, बल्कि वह दुनिया भर में महिलाओं और विज्ञान प्रेमियों के लिए प्रेरणा भी हैं। उनकी इस सफलता से न केवल नासा बल्कि भारत को भी गर्व महसूस हो रहा है। धन्यवाद। आप जुड़े रहें हरियाणा हलचल न्यूज 24 के साथ। हर खबर सबसे पहले।
That was a live view from our recovery vessel, Megan, which is stationed a couple miles away from the Splashdown site. We can see the crew there using their restraints as resting places for their arms. They were just in space moments ago, so their arms were able to float freely. To monitor progress of the Dragon spacecraft. And we're going to stand by for Splashdown, located in the Gulf of America, off the coast of Tallahassee, Florida.
And Splashdown, Crew 9 back on Earth.
Splashdown. Good main release.
Copy Splashdown. We see main chutes cut. Nick, Alex, Butch, Sunny, on behalf of SpaceX, welcome home.
It is an amazing, what a ride. I see a capsule full of grins ear to ear.
We are able to pull those out. The recovery vessel there closest to the spacecraft is going to be performing some safety checks. We can see there they're using an instrument that is basically working to detect if there are any hypergolic vapors or fumes that are still residing in and or around the Draco thruster nozzles or outlets. The hypergolic fuel, which is necessary for on-orbit burns to maneuver the spacecraft. Unfortunately, those hypergolics are unable to be breathed. They are toxic, and so this team here is doing those initial safety checks to make sure that it is safe for the rest of the recovery team to approach the spacecraft. They're also checking to make sure that any residuals from the pyros are safe and are not going to cause any issues. We can see the team working their way.
Understand, thank you.
As we saw there on the screen, we have a couple of fast boats in the recovery fleet that have quickly moved into the Splashdown location.
Jaden Jennings, who is actually on the recovery vessel and had a bird's eye view of the Splashdown today. Jaden, how are you? How was the view from the recovery vessel?
Hi, Sandra. How do you hear me?
I've got you loud and clear, Jaden. It's so great to hear you.
Awesome. So Splashdown, Sandra, was nothing
Freedom,
short of
be advised.
spectacular.
We are transitioning the forward link. Comm will be unavailable for approximately 5 minutes.
Freedom copies.
Thanks so much, Jaden. We did just have some communications letting us know that we'll have about a 5-minute period where we won't be able to hear from the crew. So please go ahead, tell us, how was the view from the recovery vessel?
Absolutely. Yeah, I was mentioning earlier, Splashdown was nothing short of spectacular. And we were stationed about 1.5 nautical miles away from the splashdown zone and had great visuals here on the recovery vessel Megan. We actually saw a little of the smoke trail as the spacecraft was coming in, and then moments later we spotted those drogue chutes, and this was quickly followed by 4 healthy white and orange main parachutes. We then tracked Dragon all the way down as it slowly propelled into the ocean. And I think I speak for all of us on the ship when I say a new core memory was made today, and we are looking forward to having Crew 9 on board with us a little later. Oh, yeah, Sandra, this view is absolutely unbeatable. So just to kind of finish off what I was saying is...
Every vessel will see that articulate backwards, and that's a good sign that we're getting even closer to pulling the capsule out of the water. It will then move forward, and the capsule will be placed inside of what you can see there is basically a basket. We call it the nest, Dragon nest, where that's where the capsule will be placed in order for it to be translated to the forward end of the vessel and for the astronauts to egress.
And before that does take place, we'll have potentially views of the rigger go ahead and jump off of the spacecraft there.
That typically occurs when the spacecraft is a little bit closer to the recovery vessel, and we usually get a really good view of that particular operation from one of the onboard cameras from the recovery vessel. That is an operation that I have a lot of respect and admiration for, that individual that does that.
Today is, as we mentioned multiple times, his name Megan, but that's actually after NASA astronaut Megan MacArthur, who flew on
straight down the recovery vessel. That platform that was closest to the camera, that is the egress platform.
Freedom, rigging is almost complete. Approximately 5 minutes until capsule lift.
Great news there from SpaceX Core. So about 5 minutes left until we see Dragon Freedom get lifted out of the water. That hydraulic arm, as I said before, is the mechanism that will lift it. It's quite swift, actually, the whole process of getting the spacecraft.
Brace for capsule lift.
Bracing.
There it goes, Dragon Freedom being lifted out of the water and onto our recovery vessel, Megan.
So once securely on...
Welcome aboard the recovery vessel. Recovery personnel are completing final checks and stand by for translation to the egress platform.
Freedom copies.
Great news there, letting us know that Dragon Freedom has been successfully recovered from the water's surface. If you've just joined us, we had an on-time splashdown at 5:57 p.m. Eastern Time, and we can now see that the water recovery operations are continuing to progress. The nest where the Dragon spacecraft is located is going to get moved forward. This will happen after one of the recovery crew members does some checks, and we'll also see some hosing. Obviously, the spacecraft splashed down in salt water. Salt water is corrosive, and we want to try and rinse out as much of the salt water as possible to reduce that corrosion on the metallic structures. So we can see some guidance there being provided, really steering the spacecraft properly into the Dragon's nest. I personally prefer the capsule when it has some of that charring from atmospheric reentry. It is the signature sign of a capsule that has returned to Earth.
Continuing to stand by for our first crew member to egress or exit Crew Dragon Freedom following their splashdown at 2:57 p.m. Pacific time. Dragon undocked from the International Space Station at 10:05 p.m. Pacific just yesterday, so it was about 17 hours of phasing. And while on board the International Space Station, Crew 9 contributed to 900 hours of science, over 150 research experiments and investigations, making great use of the microgravity lab of the International Space Station, which celebrates 25 years of continuous human presence this November.
Looks like we're about to get our first crew member here upon egress of the Dragon spacecraft.
So we are standing by for that egress. Outside of Dragon, you do see one of those stretchers. This is the expected procedure as the crew will be taken to medical facilities following their exit from Dragon.
We can see folks on board clapping as our first crew member.
And that is NASA astronaut Nick Hague, commander of Crew 9, now out of Crew Dragon Freedom. Some smiles, thumbs up, and a wave. Can't get any better than that.
Yeah, that is one happy camper, that's for sure. As we said before, it is standard procedure for all of our long-duration crew members to receive assistance upon egressing from the spacecraft. We basically help them move off of the recovery deck and into the private medical quarters for their initial consultation with the SpaceX flight surgeon. So we'll see that take place for all 4 of our crew members today.
And we are standing by for the next crew member to exit Freedom. Next up, out of the capsule, we expect Roscosmos cosmonaut Alexander Gorbanov. His first space flight. Spent 171 days in space alongside NASA astronaut Nick Hague.
Looks like we're getting some cheers and clapping on board as Alexander is slid down the little ramp and placed into the mobility aid. Once again, big smile.
Now, the two crew members remaining in Dragon are NASA astronauts Sunny Williams and Butch Wilmore. They completed 286 days in space.
One of the remaining footrests being removed from the Dragon spacecraft. As I said before, we generally try to have the crew members that are located in the two center seats aboard Dragon, and we like to have them egress first if possible, as it creates a little bit more movable working room inside the spacecraft. There is a recovery crew member inside that is helping all of our Crew 9 crew egress or exit from the spacecraft.
We are standing by for the next crew member to egress or exit Crew Dragon Freedom following the splashdown not even an hour ago at 2:57 p.m. Pacific time. Really have the recovery operations down pretty quick at this point.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible to think that, just 5 years ago when we were doing the initial demonstration missions of the Dragon for Crew Dragon, that now we're under about 30 minutes for, to retrieve the spacecraft from the water, and just several minutes here while it's been on board, and to get everyone, really to get that side hatch open. For those of you that have just recently joined, the Dragon had an on-time splashdown. It looks like we're getting our next crew member here. That is none other than Sunny Williams. Big smile, big waves. She, like her other crew members, now will be assisted onto the mobility aid.
There we have it, some waves, some thumbs up, and some smiles.
Definitely seems to be a theme among all recovery operations.
Absolutely. And of course, that leaves NASA astronaut Butch Wilmore inside Dragon in seat 4. We're getting some views of him now as he egresses or exits the spacecraft.
Once again, some elation and cheers there from Butch Wilmore. As we mentioned before, returning to Earth coming from a microgravity environment can wreak havoc on the body. So it is customary and just standard procedure for all of our long-term space residents to get assistance once they are back on board the recovery vessel.
Well, now that Nick, Butch, Sunny, and Alexander are safely back home on Earth and getting checked out by the NASA medical team, we're going to wrap up our live coverage of their return. The Crew 9 mission began a little differently than usual since Butch Wilmore and Sunny Williams were already aboard the space station when Nick Hague and Alexander Gorbanoff arrived on the Crew 9 spacecraft in September. Having arrived as the crew flight test crew for Starliner, Wilmore and Williams were fully incorporated into the space station's Expedition 72 team and began research and other work aboard the station along with the other crew members. Williams commanded the orbiting laboratory for much of the expedition. After a successful liftoff and separation from Falcon 9, Nick and Alexander made a short flight on board Dragon to the International Space Station. Veterans of long-duration space station missions, both Williams and Wilmore conducted spacewalks during their 9 months in space. Like all crews on the station, Crew 9 had the ability to leave at any point had there been an emergency. With their full-duration mission coming to an end, the crew began packing up their personal items for their return to Earth about a week ago and worked through tasks and shared lessons learned with Crew 10 teams as they arrived a few days ago.
Their journey home began about 17 hours ago when they closed the forward hatch to Dragon and undocked from the space station at 10:05 p.m. Pacific, 1:05 a.m. Eastern. After 4 successful departure burns and a phasing burn to line up their orbit, Nick, Butch, Sunny, and Alexander rested for a few hours before waking up to prepare for re-entry this morning. We jettisoned Dragon's trunk and performed our final on-orbit maneuver, the approximately 7.5-minute-long deorbit burn, and that occurred at 2:11 p.m. Pacific, 5:11 p.m. Eastern Time. And that sent Dragon on its path home. The spacecraft re-entered the Earth's atmosphere and slowed its descent with successful deployments of 2 drogue parachutes and 4 main parachutes, with the final splashdown occurring off the coast of Tallahassee, Florida at 2:57 p.m. Pacific, 5:57 p.m. Eastern. Following that successful splashdown, we saw SpaceX recovery experts move in and prepare Dragon Freedom for its lift onto the recovery vessel. And just a little less than an hour following splashdown, we saw Nick, Sunny, Butch, and Alexander make their way out of Dragon and into the recovery ship's medical facilities, safe and sound.
Next up, they'll catch a helicopter flight back to shore, where they'll transfer to aircraft that will take them home. The astronauts will take a NASA plane for the short flight back to Houston, where they'll be reunited with family and friends to bring an end to this mission. It's been an honor and a privilege to share their journey with all of you as we continue this new era in human spaceflight.
Return today marks the end of the direct handover we executed after successfully launching the Crew 10 mission to the space station just last week on Friday, March 14th. Thank you, as always, for joining us for tonight's coverage of the splashdown of Crew 9. Remember to follow SpaceX on X and NASA online and on social media for updates for the very latest on crew and cargo flights to and from the International Space Station.
And we'll continue to share the progress of Nick, Sunny, Butch, and Alexander on social media as they travel back home. We do also have a post-splashdown media briefing coming up at approximately 4:30 p.m. Pacific, 7:30 p.m. Eastern, where leadership will share a final update as we conclude this successful mission. So, from all of us at NASA and SpaceX, welcome home, Crew 9. So long.